My girlfriend's dad brought police to my dorm accusing me of grooming his daughter. 2 cops and my girlfriend's dad were outside my dorm. "There he is," the dad pointed. The officer stepped forward. "We need to discuss allegations of inappropriate contact with a minor." "What?" "You picked up my daughter from school without permission. My girlfriend asked me to give her sister a ride." Inside, they showed me screenshots, flirty texts I'd never sent. "When will you be alone?" "Can't wait to see you." "Those aren't from me. I don't even have her number," called my girlfriend. No answer. The cops exchanged looks. "Security footage shows you at the high school at 3:15. Because my girlfriend asked me to." The dad got in my face. "You've been grooming my daughter." My roommate came out, said he didn't know about me picking up a high schooler. Perfect. Making me look worse. Then the door burst open. My girlfriend stormed in, dragging her crying sister. "Tell them!" my girlfriend demanded. "I lied!" the sister sobbed. "He didn't do anything. I made it up." Silence. I've been sneaking out to see someone. Needed a cover story. My girlfriend showed our texts proving she'd asked me to pick up her sister. Time-stamped, legitimate. The officer examined them. "You're free to go." The dad went pale. "I could have ruined your life. I'm so sorry." "Wait," he turned to his daughter. "What do you mean, sneaking out?" The younger officer moved toward the door. Another call came in. "Henry, wait," the sister blurted. The room froze. The lead officer turned slowly. "How does she know your first name?" Officer Henry's hand stayed on the door handle, face draining of color. "Sarah?" The dad's voice was deadly quiet. "How do you know Officer Henry?" She was sobbing harder. "Henry, we need to talk," the lead officer said. "It's not what you think. She's 15. I know how it looks. You've been meeting with my daughter?" The dad lunged. My girlfriend had to restrain him. "We're in love!" Sarah screamed. "He's getting divorced." "When I turn 18, you came to interrogate this innocent kid while you were." The dad was being held back. "I tried to end it," Henry said. "That's why she made up the story. To protect you," Sarah cried. "So Dad wouldn't find out about us." The lead officer had his radio out. "Need backup. Officer-involved incident." Henry looked at Sarah. "Don't say anything else." "You'll say nothing," the dad spat. "You're done." As we left, I heard Miranda rights being read. The dad was calling a lawyer. Sarah kept crying about being in love. 3 hours later, Officer Henry arrested. 32, married with kids, had been mentoring Sarah through a police youth program. That's how it started. The dad came by next day, hands shaking. "I almost destroyed an innocent kid's life while the real predator stood there, in uniform, helping me do it." But that wasn't the end. A week later, my girlfriend called, panicking. "Sarah's missing." "What?" She left a note, said she and Henry are meant to be together, that she'll be back when she's 18. "But he's in jail. He made bail yesterday." My blood went cold. "The police are searching, but—" Her voice broke. "His wife says his gun safe is empty." Then she said something that changed everything. Paolo, Sarah's diary. She wrote about other girls, from the youth program. Henry wasn't the only officer. "What do you mean?" "There's a whole group of them. Trading girls. Sarah found out and threatened to expose them all unless Henry ran away with her." Jesus. That's why he agreed to come to your dorm. He was supposed to arrest you, make you disappear, make it look like you kidnapped Sarah, then they'd both vanish. But the other officer, Vargas wasn't supposed to be there. Henry's partner called in sick last minute. Vargas doesn't know about the ring. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. "You ruined everything," Henry's voice. "She's 15 and thinks she's in love. Now she knows too much. They'll kill us both unless we disappear." "Where is she?" "Safe, for now. But if those screenshots resurface, if anyone believes you were involved, it gives us cover to run." "I'm not. Check your email. New screenshots. Worse than before. Explicit. Time stamps from dates I could have been there. Photos that looked like me from behind with Sarah." "Digital forensics will prove they're fake," I said. "Eventually. But by then, you'll be expelled. Registered. Ruined. Or you could just forget this call happened." "You're insane." "No, I'm desperate. And so is she. We have 12 hours before they come for her." The line went dead. My girlfriend looked at me. We have to find her first. He's armed. This is bigger than... She's my sister. Another text, a photo. Sarah tied up, crying. Different number. Henry doesn't have her. We do. Bring $50,000, or she learns what happens to girls who threaten cops. I stared at the photo on my phone screen, and my hands started shaking so bad, I almost dropped it. Sarah was tied up in what looked like a basement or warehouse, tears running down her face, and there was a piece of tape across her mouth. My girlfriend grabbed my arm and squeezed hard. We had 12 hours to come up with $50,000, or her sister would learn what happens to girls who threaten cops, but neither of us had anywhere close to that kind of money. I was a college student living in a dorm, and she worked part-time at a coffee shop. We could maybe scrape together a few $100 between us if we emptied our bank accounts. My girlfriend pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and started scrolling through her contacts. She stopped on Vargas's name and looked at me. He was the only cop we could trust after everything that went down at my dorm when Henry tried to frame me. She hit the call button and put it on speaker. Vargas answered on the second ring, and she told him Sarah was kidnapped and showed him the ransom photo through a video call. His face went pale when he saw it. He said he would be there in 20 minutes and told us not to contact anyone else or do anything until he arrived. We sat on my bed staring at the photo and counting the minutes. Every time I blinked, I saw Sarah's terrified face behind my eyelids. My girlfriend kept checking the time on her phone over and over like somehow that would make Vargas get here faster. Vargas showed up in 18 minutes wearing jeans and a t-shirt instead of his uniform. He must have been off duty when we called. He took one look at the ransom photo on my phone and his jaw tightened. He said this was way bigger than local police could handle safely, given the corruption involved. If we went through normal channels, the corrupt officers might find out and hurt Sarah or disappear with her. He pulled out his own phone and made a call to someone at the FBI field office. He explained the whole situation in a low, urgent voice, talking about corrupt officers, a kidnapped 15-year-old girl, and a police youth program being used for grooming. The person on the other end must have taken it seriously, because Vargas nodded and said an agent would meet us at the father's house. We piled into Vargas's car and drove across town to where my girlfriend and Sarah lived with their dad. The whole drive took maybe 15 minutes but felt like hours. My girlfriend sat in the back seat holding my hand so tight my fingers went numb. We pulled up to a regular suburban house with a 2-car garage and a small front yard. The father opened the door before we even knocked. His eyes were red and puffy like he'd been crying. Vargas explained that the FBI was sending someone and we should wait inside. An agent named Quentin Garrison arrived at the father's house within 2 hours of Vargas's call. He was maybe 40 years old with gray hair at his temples, and he wore a dark suit that looked expensive. He came in carrying a laptop bag and a metal briefcase. He shook everyone's hands and said his first name, but told us to call him Garrison. He set up his equipment on the dining room table and turned it into a command center in about 10 minutes. He had 2 laptops running and some kind of communication device that looked like a fancy radio. He asked to see Sarah's diary, and the father went upstairs to get it from her room. When he came back down, he was holding a pink notebook covered in stickers. Garrison put on reading glasses and started going through it page by page. His expression got darker as he read. After maybe 20 minutes, he looked up and said, "This matched patterns the FBI had been looking into across multiple areas." He explained that youth programs create perfect cover for predators with badges because parents automatically trust officers, and victims are scared no one will believe them against police. The way he said it made it clear this wasn't the first time he'd seen something like this. He asked if he could take photos of certain pages, and the father nodded. Garrison used his phone to document sections of the diary that mentioned other girls and other officers. The father suddenly made a choking sound and covered his face with his hands. His shoulders started shaking, and my girlfriend got up and put her arms around him. He said through his tears that he brought Henry into their lives through the youth program. After the divorce, he thought having a police mentor would be good for Sarah. He wanted her to have a positive male role model and someone she could look up to. Instead, he handed his daughter over to a predator. He kept saying he was sorry over and over. My girlfriend held him and told him it wasn't his fault, but he just shook his head. I sat there watching this man fall apart and realized he'd been carrying this guilt since the truth came out about Henry. He blamed himself for not seeing the warning signs and for trusting someone just because they wore a badge. Garrison waited quietly until the father pulled himself together. Then he said in a gentle voice that predators are experts at hiding what they really are. They choose positions of trust specifically so people won't suspect them. The father wiped his eyes and nodded, but I could tell he didn't really believe it wasn't his fault. Vargas put a hand on his shoulder and said they were going to get Sarah back and make sure every corrupt officer involved paid for what they did. Garrison pulled out some kind of tracing equipment from his briefcase and had me forward him the ransom text. He connected his laptop to the device and started typing commands that I didn't understand. Numbers and data scrolled across his screen. After about 10 minutes, he said he traced the ransom demand phone number to a burner phone that pinged off a cell tower near the warehouse district on the east side of town. He pulled up a map on one of his laptops and showed us the area. It was an industrial zone with old buildings that used to be factories before the companies moved overseas. Most of them were empty now or used for storage. Garrison said we had maybe 8 hours left before the deadline based on when the text came in. He explained that corrupt cops are really dangerous when they're cornered because they have nothing to lose. They've already crossed major lines, and they know if they get caught, they'll spend decades in prison. That makes them willing to do desperate things. My girlfriend asked if we should just try to get the money somehow and pay the ransom. Garrison shook his head and said, "Paying rarely works in kidnapping cases. Once they have the money, there's no reason to release the victim and every reason to get rid of the witness. Our best chance was to find Sarah before the deadline and get her out safely." Vargas pulled me aside into the kitchen while Garrison kept working on his laptops. He said in a quiet voice that the fake evidence against me was still a big problem. If anything went wrong during the rescue, the corrupt officers could release those screenshots and photos to destroy my credibility as a witness. The media would run with the story of a college student accused of inappropriate contact with a minor, and by the time forensics proved the images were fake, the damage would be done. I'd be expelled from the school and probably end up on some registry. Even after being cleared, my name would be connected to those accusations forever. Vargas said we needed to get the forensic analysis done right away to prove the images were fake before we moved forward. That way, if the corrupt officers tried to use them, we'd have proof ready to show it was all made up. He made another call to someone at the police forensics lab. I heard him explain the situation and say it was urgent. The person on the other end must have agreed, because Vargas said they'd send someone over within the hour. We went back to the dining room where Garrison was still working. The father was sitting on the couch staring at nothing. My girlfriend sat next to him holding his hand. A woman showed up about 45 minutes later carrying a laptop bag and some other equipment. Vargas introduced her as a forensic analyst from the police lab. She didn't give her name, and I got the feeling she was doing this off the books as a favor to Vargas. She sat down at the dining room table next to Garrison and had me unlock my phone. She connected it to her laptop with a cable and started running some kind of scanning software. She explained while she worked that the metadata shows clear signs when images have been changed or created using editing software. Every digital photo contains hidden information about when it was taken, what device was used, and whether it's been modified. She said the screenshots on my phone had obvious signs of being made with photo editing tools. The timestamps didn't match up with the actual message data, and the photos that looked like me from behind were clearly taken from social media and edited to look like different situations. After about an hour, she had a detailed report typed up that proved beyond any doubt I never sent those messages or took those pictures. She saved copies to a flash drive and printed out hard copies. Vargas took them and said he'd make sure they got into the right hands if the corrupt officers tried anything. I felt this huge weight lift off my chest, knowing I had proof I was innocent. Garrison's phone rang, and he answered it immediately. He listened for a minute and then started taking notes on a legal pad. When he hung up, he said he just got information from a detective in a neighboring area named Alessandra Monahan. She'd been tracking similar cases involving officers and youth programs. She identified 3 officers who fit the pattern and had connections to the youth program. One of them was named Crispin Steele, and he'd been looked at before for using too much force during arrests. Garrison pulled up police records on his laptop and showed us Steele's photo. He was a big guy with a shaved head and cold eyes. The father said he remembered seeing him at a youth program event once. Steele had been friendly and spent time talking to the kids. It made my skin crawl thinking about predators using these programs to find victims. Garrison said Monahan was sending over her files and would coordinate with the FBI on the rescue operation. Having someone from outside our local department was important because we couldn't risk any leaks to the corrupt officers. Vargas agreed and said the fewer local cops involved, the better. We couldn't trust anyone from the department except him. My girlfriend suddenly jumped up and said she remembered something. She ran upstairs to Sarah's room and came back a few minutes later with the diary open to a specific page. She said there were more entries that mentioned places where Henry took Sarah. One of them was a cabin that belonged to one of the other officers. She read the entry out loud, and it described a weekend trip where Henry drove her 2 hours outside the city. Sarah had written about a small cabin in the woods near a lake. She'd thought it was romantic at the time, but now reading it made me feel sick. Garrison asked if there were any more details about the location. My girlfriend flipped through more pages and found another entry with the name of the lake. Garrison typed it into his computer and pulled up a map. He said there were maybe a dozen cabins in that area. He got on his radio and called for a team to check it out. Within minutes, he had agents heading to the location. We sat around the dining room table waiting for updates. The father kept checking his watch. My girlfriend held my hand so tight it hurt, but I didn't say anything. The tension in the room was so thick I could barely breathe. Every minute that went by was another minute Sarah was in danger. Garrison's radio crackled, and a voice reported they were approaching the lake area. We all leaned forward, listening. The voice said they were checking the cabins one by one. My girlfriend's fingernails dug into my palm. Then the radio crackled again, and the voice said they found the cabin, but it was empty. No sign of Sarah or anyone else. But they found her jacket and school backpack inside, which meant she'd definitely been there recently. Garrison ended the radio call and turned to face us. He said the empty cabin confirmed Sarah had been moved after Henry's arrest, which meant the other corrupt officers grabbed her to keep her quiet about what she knows. The father slumped in his chair, and my girlfriend squeezed my hand harder. Vargas's phone buzzed, and he stepped into the kitchen to answer it. We could hear him talking quietly for maybe 2 minutes before he came back looking serious. He said a dispatcher named Sabina Lott from the police station just contacted him secretly. She overheard Crispin Steele making suspicious calls about a pickup at the warehouse district. Vargas explained that Sabina was risking her job to help because she has a teenage daughter, and the thought of officers doing this makes her sick. Garrison immediately got on his laptop and started pulling up maps of the warehouse district while talking into his radio. He called for a tactical team from the FBI and state police, deliberately excluding any local officers except Vargas. He looked at us and explained that we can't risk word getting back to the corrupt officers because they're armed, desperate, and have already shown they'll kidnap a child to protect themselves. My phone started ringing. Unknown number. My stomach dropped. I answered, and Henry's voice came through panicked and rushed. He said the other officers are going to kill Sarah because she's too much of a liability now. He claimed he actually loves her and never wanted this to happen. I felt rage building in my chest at his manipulation even now, after everything he'd done. I wanted to scream at him, but Garrison was already tracing the call on his equipment. Henry kept talking, saying they were planning to make her disappear permanently, and he couldn't stop them alone. Then the line went dead. Garrison looked up from his laptop screen. He said Henry's call came from near the same warehouse area where the ransom demand originated. He made the decision right there to move in immediately, rather than wait for the deadline, because Henry's panic suggested the situation was getting worse, faster than expected. My girlfriend stood up and said she was coming with us. Garrison shook his head and said it was too dangerous. Her father stood too and said they both needed to be there when Sarah was found. Garrison looked at Vargas, who nodded. He finally agreed they could stay in a command vehicle a safe distance away. Vargas promised to keep them protected while the tactical team moved in. Within 20 minutes, we were driving to the warehouse district in a convoy of unmarked vehicles. I sat in the back of an SUV with my girlfriend and her father. I could see my girlfriend gripping her phone so hard her knuckles were white. The father kept repeating that Sarah is strong and smart and will survive this. He said it over and over like he was trying to convince himself as much as us. The warehouses came into view, old brick buildings with broken windows and rusted metal doors. Garrison's voice came through Vargas's radio, saying his team was using thermal imaging equipment. They identified the specific warehouse based on heat signatures and movement inside. He confirmed at least 4 adults and 1 smaller person who matches Sarah's size. Garrison explained the tactical approach through his radio. He said Sarah's safety was the absolute priority over arresting the corrupt officers. The tactical team spread out around the building, moving quickly and quietly. We stayed back in the command vehicle about 2 blocks away. Garrison's voice came through the bullhorn, identifying himself as FBI. He ordered everyone inside to release Sarah unharmed. For 30 seconds, there was complete silence. Then gunfire erupted from inside the building. The sound was so loud even from where we were. My girlfriend screamed and jumped out of the vehicle, trying to run toward the warehouse. Vargas grabbed her and physically held her back, while her father wrapped his arms around her shoulders. She was crying and fighting against them. The tactical team returned fire, and I could hear Garrison on the radio coordinating entry points. My heart was beating, so fast I thought I might pass out. More gunshots, glass breaking, someone yelling commands. My girlfriend kept screaming Sarah's name. The father was holding her tight and crying too. Vargas kept his body between them and the warehouse. I couldn't breathe right. The radio crackled with voices reporting positions and movements. Garrison's team was breaching the building from multiple sides. More gunfire. Then a few seconds of quiet. Then more shots. I counted maybe 15 or 20 separate bursts of gunfire. Each one made my whole body shake. The radio went quiet for maybe 10 seconds, and I stopped breathing completely. Garrison's voice crackled through. He said they had Sarah and she was alive. My girlfriend made a sound I'd never heard before and collapsed against her father, sobbing. He wrapped his arms around her and started crying too. I realized tears were running down my face and my whole body was shaking, but this time from relief, not fear. Vargas turned around from the front seat and nodded at us. He said the tactical team was bringing Sarah out now. We could see movement near the warehouse entrance. 2 agents in tactical gear came out carrying someone small between them. Even from this distance, I could tell it was Sarah by her dark hair. The ambulance that had been waiting rushed forward, and the agents put her inside. My girlfriend tried to open the vehicle door, but Vargas said we needed to wait for the all clear because the situation wasn't fully secure yet. She pressed her face against the window watching the ambulance. The father kept saying thank God over and over. More agents emerged from the warehouse. Some were escorting a man in handcuffs. Others were checking the perimeter. Garrison walked toward our vehicle and Vargas got out to talk to him. Through the open door, I heard Garrison say 2 suspects were dead and 1 was in custody. He said Sarah appeared stable, but was transported immediately for medical evaluation. Vargas asked about Henry, and Garrison's face got hard. He said Henry escaped through a back exit before they could secure it. My girlfriend heard that and started crying harder. The father asked if Henry was armed, and Garrison said they had to assume yes based on his wife's report about the gun safe. He said every law enforcement agency in 3 states was now looking for Henry, and they'd find him. Vargas asked about the dead suspects, and Garrison said one was Crispin Steele, who they'd been investigating. The other was an officer from a neighboring jurisdiction. My girlfriend looked at me and whispered that Sarah was alive. I squeezed her hand because I couldn't speak. Garrison told us we could follow the ambulance to the hospital but needed to stay back and let the doctors work. The father said he understood and just wanted to see his daughter. We drove to the hospital in silence except for my girlfriend's quiet crying. The father kept his hand on her shoulder the whole way. At the hospital, they took Sarah straight into an exam room. We sat in the waiting area, and I watched the clock on the wall. Every minute felt like an hour. My girlfriend couldn't sit still and kept pacing back and forth. The father stared at the floor. Vargas stayed with us and kept checking his radio for updates on Henry. After maybe 45 minutes, a doctor came out. She said Sarah was dehydrated and had some bruises and minor cuts, but nothing serious physically. She said they were giving her fluids and treating the injuries. My girlfriend asked when they could see her, and the doctor said soon, but a trauma counselor was talking with Sarah first. The father asked how Sarah seemed emotionally, and the doctor paused before answering. She said Sarah was in shock and very quiet, but that was normal given what she'd been through. She explained that the physical healing would happen quickly, but the psychological recovery would take much longer. She said Sarah would need ongoing therapy and a lot of family support. The father nodded and said they'd do whatever Sarah needed. The trauma counselor came out about 20 minutes later. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes. She said Sarah was asking for her family and we could go in, but to keep the visit short because Sarah needed rest. She pulled my girlfriend and the father aside and spoke quietly to them. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw the father's face crumple. My girlfriend wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. The counselor looked at me and asked if I was Paolo. I said yes, and she said Sarah wanted to apologize to me. She said I didn't have to see Sarah if I wasn't comfortable, but Sarah had specifically asked. I told her I wanted to see Sarah and let her know I didn't blame her. We walked down the hallway to Sarah's room. She looked so small in the hospital bed. Her face was pale and there were dark circles under her eyes. She had an IV in her arm and bandages on her wrists. When she saw us, she started crying. My girlfriend rushed over and hugged her carefully. The father stood by the bed with tears running down his face. He kept touching Sarah's hair like he couldn't believe she was real. Sarah looked at me over my girlfriend's shoulder. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. She said she was sorry for everything, for the false accusations and for putting everyone in danger. I moved closer to the bed and told her none of this was her fault. I said Henry manipulated her, and she was the victim. She shook her head and said she should have known better. She said she was 15 and stupid and almost got me arrested. My girlfriend told her to stop and said Henry was a predator who targeted her specifically. The father said Henry was a trained police officer who knew exactly how to manipulate kids. I could see the guilt and shame in Sarah's eyes. It was deep and painful, and I knew it would take years for her to work through it. The trauma counselor stepped forward and said, Sarah needed rest now. She said we could come back tomorrow and spend more time with her. My girlfriend kissed Sarah's forehead and promised she'd be back first thing in the morning. The father held Sarah's hand for a long moment before letting go. As we left the room, I looked back and saw Sarah staring at the ceiling with tears running down her face. The next morning, Garrison came to the hospital and told us the captured officer was cooperating with the FBI. He said the guy was scared and knew he was facing serious time, so he was giving up names. Garrison said the officer named 5 other members of the corruption ring, 2 sergeants and a lieutenant plus 2 more patrol officers. He explained this was the breakthrough they needed to dismantle the entire operation. He said they'd be making arrests over the next few days. My girlfriend asked if they'd found Henry yet, and Garrison said no, but every cop in the region was looking for him. He said Henry couldn't hide forever. The father asked what would happen to the officers who were named, and Garrison said they were building cases against each one. He said with the testimony from the captured officer plus Sarah's diary and the evidence from the warehouse they had solid cases. Vargas arrived and pulled Garrison aside. They talked quietly for a few minutes, then Garrison came back. He said Henry's car was found abandoned near the state line. They were expanding the search, but Henry had a head start. My girlfriend went pale and asked if Sarah was safe here. The father said he was hiring private security to watch Sarah's room around the clock. Garrison said that was a good idea, and the FBI would also maintain a presence at the hospital. Over the next 3 days, the manhunt for Henry spread across state lines. News reports showed his photo everywhere. My girlfriend barely slept and kept checking her phone for updates. Every time someone walked past Sarah's hospital room, she tensed up. The father hired 2 security guards who worked in 12-hour shifts. They checked everyone who came near Sarah's room. Sarah was moved to a private room on a secure floor. The other officers who were named started getting arrested. We saw it on the news. 2 sergeants taken out of the police station in handcuffs. A lieutenant arrested at his home. My girlfriend and I watched the coverage, and I felt sick, knowing these were the people who were supposed to protect kids. The father said the entire system had failed and needed to be torn down and rebuilt. On the 4th day after the rescue, a man named Malachi Cartwright came forward. He was the coordinator of the youth program where Henry met Sarah. He looked devastated when he talked to Garrison at the hospital. He said he never suspected anything and thought he was helping at-risk kids by connecting them with police mentors. He said the program had been running for 6 years and dozens of kids had participated. Garrison asked for records showing which officers had access to which children over the past 4 years. Malachi said he had everything documented and would provide it all. He kept apologizing and saying he should have seen the signs. The father told him they were all fooled because these were police officers with badges and authority. Malachi brought boxes of files to the FBI office. Garrison's team started going through them systematically. They cross-referenced the names of officers in the corruption ring with the kids they'd mentored. The pattern became clear quickly. Using the records, Garrison's team identified at least 8 other potential victims who had been in the program. They started carefully reaching out to these families. Some parents were defensive at first, others were horrified. One former participant named BC Lay came forward immediately. She was 17 now, but had been in the program when she was 15. She told Garrison that one of the arrested officers had groomed her 2 years ago. She said he started with compliments and special attention, just like Henry did with Sarah. She said it progressed to inappropriate touching and eventually sexual contact. She said she was too afraid to report it because he was a cop and she thought no one would believe her. Garrison said her testimony was crucial because it established a pattern. It showed this wasn't just Henry acting alone, but a systematic operation. Bisi asked if she could meet Sarah and Garrison arranged it. Bisi came to the hospital on the 5th day after the rescue. She was tall with long dark hair and looked older than 17. My girlfriend brought her to Sarah's room and stayed while they talked. I waited outside with the father and the security guards. They were in there for almost 3 hours. When they came out, both Bisi and Sarah had been crying, but something was different about Sarah's face. My girlfriend told us later that it was the first time Sarah had shown any real emotion besides guilt and shame since the rescue. She said Bisi helped Sarah understand she wasn't alone and wasn't crazy for feeling confused about what happened. She said Bisi explained how the manipulation worked and how these officers were trained to make victims feel special and were chosen. The father asked Bisi if she'd be willing to testify, and she said yes without hesitation. She said she wanted to make sure these officers never hurt anyone else. Garrison said Bisi's testimony combined with Sarah's and the other evidence they were gathering would be devastating in court. Over the next week, more victims came forward. Some were current participants in the program. Others had aged out years ago. Each story followed a similar pattern. Officers gaining trust through the program, then slowly crossing boundaries. The scope of it was staggering. The father watched the news coverage and said he felt sick, knowing how many families had been destroyed. On the 7th day after the rescue, the district attorney held a press conference. We watched it on the TV in Sarah's hospital room. The DA stood at a podium with Garrison and other officials behind her. She announced charges against all 6 identified corrupt officers: conspiracy, kidnapping, sexual abuse of minors, and RICO violations for operating as a criminal enterprise. She said this was one of the most disturbing cases of institutional corruption she'd seen in her career. She said the officers had betrayed their badges and the community's trust in the worst possible way. She said the investigation was ongoing and more charges might be filed. She took questions from reporters. Someone asked about Henry, and she said he remained at large, but they were confident he'd be apprehended soon. The father watched with tears streaming down his face. My girlfriend held Sarah's hand. Sarah stared at the screen with an expression I couldn't read. When the press conference ended, the father turned to Sarah and said justice was finally happening. Sarah nodded but didn't say anything. I knew she was still processing everything. The trauma counselor had warned us that seeing the officers charged might bring up complicated feelings. Relief mixed with anger, mixed with residual manipulation and confusion. She said healing wasn't linear, and Sarah would have good days and bad days for a long time. 2 days later, Garrison called with news that Border Patrol agents had stopped Henry trying to cross into Canada. He was using fake identification and had shaved his head and grown a beard, but the facial recognition system flagged him anyway. The agents found cash, another fake passport, and a burner phone with messages to Sarah that made it clear he was planning to come back for her once things settled down. Garrison said the extradition process took less than 12 hours because of the federal charges, and Henry was now in a maximum security facility with no possibility of bail. He explained that Henry was facing life in prison on multiple federal charges, including kidnapping across state lines, conspiracy, and weapons violations that couldn't be plea bargained away. The father asked if there was any chance Henry could get out, and Garrison said absolutely not with the evidence they had and the number of victims coming forward. My girlfriend squeezed my hand, and I could feel some of the tension finally leaving her body knowing Henry was locked up for good. Sarah was released from the hospital after 5 days of observation and medical treatment. The doctors cleared her physically, but referred her to a therapist who worked specifically with victims of sexual abuse and manipulation. The therapist's office was in a quiet building near the father's house, and Sarah started going 3 times a week for intensive sessions. My girlfriend went with her to the first appointment and waited in the lobby while Sarah met with the therapist alone. Afterward, the therapist called the father and my girlfriend into her office and explained that recovery would be gradual with setbacks and difficult moments. She said Sarah was showing signs of trauma bonding with Henry and would need time to understand that what happened wasn't love, but manipulation and abuse. She said there would be good days and bad days, and the family needed to be patient and supportive without pushing Sarah to process things faster than she was ready. The father asked how long it would take, and the therapist said there was no timeline because every survivor heals differently, but Sarah was young, and with proper support, she could eventually build a healthy life. The forensic analyst completed her examination of all the fake screenshots and photos that Henry had created to frame me. She provided a detailed report showing exactly how the images were manipulated using editing software and proving the metadata had been altered to create false timestamps. The university received the report and issued an official statement clearing my name of any wrongdoing related to the accusations. They sent the statement to every student and faculty member and posted it on the university website and social media accounts. My roommate came to find me in the library the day after the statement went out and apologized for making me look suspicious during the initial confrontation in our dorm. He said he panicked when he saw the cops and didn't understand what was really happening, and he felt terrible about adding to the nightmare I was going through. I told him I understood and didn't blame him because the whole situation was designed to make me look guilty. He asked if there was anything he could do to help, and I said just treating me normally would be enough because I was tired of people looking at me like I was either a victim or a suspect. I started having nightmares about the interrogation and the moment when I thought my life was about to be destroyed by false accusations. In the dreams, I was back in my dorm room with the cops showing me the fake screenshots, and no matter how much I protested my innocence, nobody believed me. I would wake up sweating and panicking and unable to fall back asleep. After a week of this, my girlfriend suggested I talk to someone at campus counseling services. I made an appointment and met with a counselor who specialized in trauma. She listened to everything that happened and explained that being falsely accused creates its own kind of trauma, separate from what Sarah experienced, but still very real. She said the fear and helplessness I felt during those hours when I thought I was going to be arrested and registered as a sex offender had left psychological marks that needed to be addressed. She helped me understand that my nightmares were my brain's way of processing the terror, and that with time and work, I could reduce their frequency and intensity. We set up weekly sessions, and she taught me some techniques for managing the anxiety when it spiked. My girlfriend and I had long conversations over the next few weeks about everything that happened. We would sit in my apartment or walk around campus and talk through the whole nightmare from start to finish. She told me she was amazed I didn't run away when her family's crisis became so dangerous and violent. She said most people would have protected themselves and distanced from the situation, but I stayed and helped search for Sarah, even though I was terrified the entire time. I explained that I love her and couldn't abandon Sarah knowing she was in danger, even though part of me wanted to run as far away as possible from corrupt cops with guns. I told her there were moments when I thought about just disappearing to protect myself from the fake evidence, but I couldn't live with myself if something happened to Sarah because I was too scared to help. She cried and said she didn't know what she would have done without me during those days when Sarah was missing and we didn't know if we'd find her alive. I said we got through it together, and that's what matters now. The father made the difficult decision to sell his house and move the family to a different town 40 minutes away. He said Sarah needed a fresh start away from places that reminded her of Henry and the manipulation and abuse. He didn't want her running into kids from the youth program or driving past locations where Henry had taken her. My girlfriend supported the decision, but was sad about leaving the house where she grew up. The father listed the property, and it sold within 3 weeks to a young family. He found a smaller house in the new town with good schools and a quiet neighborhood. My girlfriend decided to transfer to my university so she could stay close to her family while finishing her degree. The admissions office processed her transfer quickly once they understood the circumstances, and she was able to start classes the following semester. We found a small apartment near campus that we could afford together and started building our life in a new space that didn't carry the weight of everything that happened. Sarah slowly opened up in therapy about how Henry groomed her over months through the youth program. She described how it started with compliments about how mature she was and how she wasn't like other girls her age. He gave her special attention and made her feel chosen and important. He gradually isolated her from friends by suggesting they didn't understand her the way he did. He shared personal information about his marriage problems and made Sarah feel like she was helping him through a difficult time. He reframed their relationship as romantic rather than predatory by talking about waiting until she turned 18 and how society didn't understand connections between people with age differences. The therapist helped Sarah understand these were classic manipulation tactics used by predators to make victims feel special while actually exploiting and abusing them. She explained that none of it was Sarah's fault, and that Henry was trained as a police officer to read people and gain trust, which made him especially dangerous. Sarah cried during these sessions as she began to understand how thoroughly she had been manipulated and how what she thought was love was actually calculated abuse. More victims came forward as news of the arrests and charges spread through the community. Girls who had been in the youth program years ago saw the press coverage and finally felt safe enough to report what happened to them. Parents who had noticed warning signs but didn't know what to do contacted the FBI with information. Eventually, 12 families joined together to file a civil lawsuit against the police department for failing to supervise the youth program and allowing predators to access vulnerable children. Garrison told us the institutional failures were systemic and went beyond just the corrupt officers. He said supervisors ignored red flags, background checks weren't thorough enough, and there was no oversight of one-on-one interactions between officers and minors. He said the department would face major reforms, including independent monitoring of all youth programs, mandatory training on grooming and abuse, and strict protocols for any officer working with children. The lawsuit was seeking damages, but more importantly, was demanding structural changes to prevent this from ever happening again. Henry's wife filed for divorce and released a public statement through her lawyer. She said she had no knowledge of his crimes and was horrified by what he did to Sarah and the other victims. She said she was cooperating fully with investigators and wanted justice for the families he destroyed. She provided evidence that helped establish timelines and patterns of his behavior, including credit card statements showing purchases he made for Sarah and phone records showing when he was communicating with her. She also shared that she had noticed him becoming distant and secretive over the past year, but when she confronted him, he blamed work stress, and she believed him. She said she felt guilty for not seeing the signs, but her therapist was helping her understand that Henry was skilled at deception and hiding his crimes. She asked for privacy for herself and her children as they tried to rebuild their lives separate from the monster he turned out to be. The trial for the surviving corrupt officers began 4 months after Sarah's rescue. The prosecution had built an overwhelming case with testimony from multiple victims, evidence from the FBI investigation, and cooperation from some of the arrested officers who agreed to testify against the others. Sarah had to take the stand and describe what happened to her. My girlfriend and the father sat in the courtroom for support, while I watched from the gallery with other family members of victims. Sarah wore a simple dress and kept her hands folded in her lap as the prosecutor asked her questions. She spoke clearly and bravely about how Henry groomed her through the youth program, how he manipulated her into believing they were in love, and how the other officers knew what was happening and helped cover it up. She described the kidnapping and being held in the warehouse, and how terrified she was that she was going to die. The defense attorneys tried to rattle her during cross-examination, but she stayed calm and consistent in her answers. When she finished testifying, the judge called a recess, and the father hugged her in the hallway while she finally let herself cry from the stress of reliving everything in front of strangers. The defense attorney stood up the next day and went straight after Sarah's credibility. He pulled out copies of the false accusations she made against me and asked her to explain why anyone should believe her now when she lied before. Sarah's hands shook, but she looked right at him and said, Henry told her exactly what to say and how to make it look real. The prosecutor objected and showed the jury the forensic report proving those screenshots were completely fake. He explained how Henry created the false evidence to frame me as part of his plan to disappear with Sarah. The defense attorney tried to push back, but the forensic analyst took the stand and walked through every piece of digital manipulation. She pointed out the metadata inconsistencies and the editing software signatures. The jury looked convinced, and the defense attorney sat down looking defeated. The prosecutor then showed how Henry groomed Sarah over months and manipulated her into protecting him by creating the cover story. He displayed text messages where Henry coached her on what to say and how to act. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, the 4 women read guilty on every single count for all 5 officers. The courtroom erupted, and the father grabbed my girlfriend's hand while Sarah cried quietly. The judge set sentencing for 3 weeks later and remanded all 5 into custody immediately. At sentencing, the officers got anywhere from 15 to 30 years in federal prison. The judge said their betrayal of public trust and abuse of vulnerable children deserved the maximum penalties. Henry's trial was scheduled separately because he faced additional kidnapping and conspiracy charges. The prosecutor told us outside the courthouse that Henry would likely die in prison given how many counts he was facing and the mandatory minimums that applied. Sarah went back to the school 2 weeks after the trial ended. She had missed almost a full semester, and the counselor Eleanor worked with every teacher to create a plan. My girlfriend told me Sarah struggled with the schoolwork she missed and felt awkward around other students who knew what happened. But she showed up every single day and sat in class and turned in assignments. Her therapist said that took incredible strength after everything she went through. Eleanor arranged for Sarah to have a private space if she needed breaks during the day. She also made sure Sarah's schedule avoided any classes with students who made comments or asked invasive questions. My girlfriend visited Sarah at lunch most days and said she seemed tired but determined. The therapist explained that showing up consistently was a huge part of healing because it gave Sarah back some control over her life. The police department got placed under federal oversight a month later. A judge ordered comprehensive reforms, including extensive background checks for anyone working with minors and strict supervision protocols for all youth programs. The department had to implement mandatory reporting systems where any concerning behavior got flagged immediately. Malachi redesigned the entire mentorship program with multiple adults present at all times and outside oversight from child advocacy organizations. He created detailed screening processes and ongoing monitoring requirements. The reforms also required annual training on grooming tactics and abuse recognition for every officer. Malachi told Garrison he felt sick knowing predators used his program to access kids. He said the new safeguards would make it nearly impossible for anyone to operate the way Henry and the others did. My nightmares about the interrogation slowly faded over the next few months. I still felt anxious whenever I saw police officers on campus or around town. My heart would speed up and I'd get this tight feeling in my chest. But the panic attacks stopped happening and I could function normally most days. My counselor said that was a completely normal response to what I experienced. She explained that I learned to be cautious around authority figures who could abuse their power, and that didn't mean I was broken. It just meant my brain was protecting me based on what actually happened. She helped me develop strategies for managing the anxiety when it came up. I learned to recognize the physical signs and use breathing techniques to calm down. The counselor said some people never fully trust police again after being falsely accused, and that was okay. My girlfriend and I moved into a small apartment together near campus at the start of the next semester. Having our own space away from dorms and her family's house helped both of us feel more stable. We could control our environment and have privacy to process everything that happened. She was doing really well in her classes and started talking about maybe studying social work in graduate school. She said watching Sarah go through therapy and recovery made her want to help other families dealing with trauma. We'd cook dinner together and talk about our days, and it felt normal in a way nothing had felt normal for months. The apartment became this safe place where we could just be a regular couple instead of constantly dealing with crisis and chaos. The father started attending a support group for parents of abuse survivors around the same time. My girlfriend said he went every Tuesday night and actually participated in discussions. He was slowly working through his guilt about bringing Henry into their lives through the youth program. She told me he was doing better overall, but still had hard days where he'd get stuck thinking about what-ifs. He'd replay the moment he brought those cops to my dorm and almost destroyed an innocent person while trusting a predator. The support group helped him understand that Henry was skilled at deception and manipulated everyone around him. Other parents shared similar stories about missing warning signs or trusting the wrong people. My girlfriend said her dad was learning to forgive himself, but it was a long process. Sarah made a friend at her new school a few months into the semester. The girl's name was Jen, and she had also survived trauma from a coach at her previous school. They connected in art class and started sitting together at lunch. My girlfriend said watching them support each other was really powerful. They understood what the other was going through without needing to explain everything. The therapist told Sarah that having peer support was crucial for teenagers recovering from abuse. It reduced the isolation and shame that made healing so much harder. Sarah and Jen started hanging out outside school and doing normal teenage things like going to movies and shopping. My girlfriend said Sarah smiled more after meeting Jen and seemed less weighed down by everything that happened. Henry's trial finally happened 6 months after that night at my dorm, when everything exploded. The prosecution had built an overwhelming case with testimony from multiple victims and all the evidence the FBI collected. Henry was charged with 23 separate counts, including kidnapping, sexual abuse, conspiracy, witness tampering, and using his position as an officer to commit crimes. The trial lasted 3 weeks, and Sarah had to testify again. This time she was calmer and more prepared. She described how Henry groomed her and manipulated her and used his badge to make her feel like he was the only one she could trust. The defense tried to argue that Sarah pursued him, but the prosecutor destroyed that narrative with expert testimony about grooming and power dynamics. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back, the forewoman read guilty on all 23 counts. Henry's face went completely blank, and his lawyer slumped in his chair. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. At sentencing, the judge went through each count methodically and explained why Henry deserved the maximum penalty. He said Henry's betrayal of his oath as a police officer and his systematic abuse of vulnerable children represented the worst kind of criminal conduct. He sentenced Henry to 45 years in federal prison without any possibility of parole. Henry would be 77 years old before he could even be considered for release. The prosecutor told us afterward that with good behavior rules and federal sentencing guidelines, Henry would most likely die in prison. After Henry's sentencing, Sarah told her therapist she felt like she could finally breathe because he couldn't hurt her or manipulate her anymore. My girlfriend shared this with me later and said Sarah still had hard days where the trauma felt overwhelming. She still got triggered by certain things like seeing police officers or hearing news about other abuse cases. But knowing Henry was locked away permanently removed the constant fear that lived in the back of her mind. She didn't have to worry about him showing up or contacting her or trying to convince her they belonged together. The therapist said that sense of safety was foundational for Sarah's continued healing. She could focus on processing what happened without the added stress of wondering if her abuser might come back. Sarah started talking more in therapy about her feelings and experiences instead of shutting down. She was beginning to understand that what Henry did to her was abuse and manipulation, not love. The lawsuit against the police department took 8 months to settle, but when it finally happened, the amount was bigger than anyone expected. $7 million split between all 12 families who joined the case. The father sat us down at the kitchen table and explained that Sarah's portion would be $400,000 going into a trust fund she could access for college and medical care. Sarah looked at the paperwork for a long time before saying she wanted to donate $50,000 to help other survivors get therapy and support services. My girlfriend squeezed her hand, and the father nodded with tears in his eyes. The settlement also forced the department to pay for counseling services for any victim who needed it and fund new oversight programs to prevent this from happening again. A month after the settlement came through, Bissy called Sarah and suggested they start a support group for teenagers who survived abuse by authority figures. They found a community center willing to donate space twice a month and put up flyers at schools and therapy offices. The first meeting had 6 girls show up, including Sarah and Bissy. My girlfriend volunteered to help coordinate the meetings and handle the administrative stuff like scheduling and snacks. I drove them to the third meeting and waited in the parking lot, watching through the window as these young women sat in a circle sharing their stories and supporting each other. My girlfriend came out after 2 hours and said Sarah smiled more during that meeting than she had in months. Watching them help each other process trauma and shame made something good come out of all the horrible things that happened. Vargas got promoted to detective 4 months after Henry's sentencing and transferred to a new unit investigating police misconduct and corruption. He stopped by my apartment one evening, and we sat on the balcony drinking coffee while he explained his new role. He said what happened with Henry and the corruption ring changed how he saw his job and his profession. He told me most cops are good people trying to help, but the ones who abuse power destroy trust for everyone. His new unit would investigate complaints against officers and work with outside oversight groups to hold bad cops accountable. I thanked him for believing me that night at my dorm when everything could have gone so wrong. He said he almost didn't come that night because Henry's partner called in sick last minute, but something made him volunteer to go along. That random decision saved my life and exposed the whole corruption ring. Alessandra, from the neighboring jurisdiction, got recruited by the FBI to work on a national task force addressing police corruption and abuse in youth programs. Garrison called me to share the news and said cases like ours were more common than people realized. Having experienced investigators who understood the patterns was important for protecting vulnerable kids across the country. Alessandra would help train other agents and work with local departments to identify warning signs before predators could hurt children. Garrison said the task force already identified 3 other corruption rings in different states using similar methods. My grades improved significantly once I could focus on classes again without constant fear and trauma overwhelming everything. The panic attacks stopped happening every day, and I could sit through lectures without my mind replaying that interrogation in my dorm. My professors were understanding about the extensions I needed during the worst months, and I caught up on all my incomplete work. By the end of the semester, my GPA was back above 3.5, and I was on track to graduate on time. Walking across campus without feeling like everyone was staring at me or judging me felt like getting my life back. My girlfriend and Sarah's relationship grew stronger through everything they survived together. One afternoon, Sarah told me she was grateful her sister never gave up on finding her, even when it got dangerous. She said having family support made it possible to testify against Henry in court and face what he did to her. My girlfriend cried and hugged her and said she would always fight for her no matter what. Watching them rebuild trust after Sarah's lies almost destroyed my life showed me how complicated family bonds are and how trauma affects everyone differently. The father invited me to dinner at their new house 6 months after we moved them to the safer neighborhood. We sat at the table eating pasta while he apologized again for nearly destroying my life based on false accusations. I told him I understood he was trying to protect his daughter based on what he believed was true at the time. He said I showed more grace and courage than he deserved, and he was grateful I didn't abandon his family when things got dangerous with the corrupt cops. I explained that I loved his older daughter and couldn't let Sarah get hurt even after what she put me through. He reached across the table and shook my hand with tears running down his face. Sarah started talking about her future during therapy sessions instead of just processing the past. Her therapist called my girlfriend to share that Sarah mentioned wanting to study psychology or social work to help other kids being manipulated by adults they should be able to trust. The therapist said having future goals was a positive sign that Sarah was processing trauma and moving forward instead of staying stuck. My girlfriend told me Sarah researched college programs that focused on trauma counseling and child advocacy. Seeing her think about how to turn her pain into purpose gave me hope that she would be okay eventually. The youth program got completely restructured with new leadership and strict safety rules. Malachi stayed on as coordinator, but now worked within a framework designed to prevent predators from accessing vulnerable children. Every volunteer had to pass extensive background checks, and no adult could be alone with a kid ever. Multiple supervisors observed every activity, and child advocacy organizations reviewed the program quarterly. Malachi told the father he felt sick, knowing he unknowingly helped officers abuse children, but was committed to making the program safe going forward. The new structure meant fewer volunteers could participate, but the kids who did join were actually protected this time. A documentary filmmaker reached out to Garrison about making a film covering the corruption ring and how it got exposed. Garrison called a meeting with all the families to discuss whether they wanted to participate. Sarah and the other victims talked it over and decided they needed privacy to heal rather than reliving everything on camera. The father drafted a statement saying they appreciated public awareness about police corruption, but their families needed space to recover. The filmmaker respected their decision and said he would make the documentary using court records and interviews with investigators instead of victim testimony. Garrison told us later that protecting the victim's privacy was more important than any film project, no matter how much awareness it could raise. A few weeks after the filmmaker contacted us, I sat in my advisor's office talking about changing my major. I explained everything that happened with the false accusations and how the forensic analyst's work saved my life by proving the screenshots were fake. My advisor listened carefully and pulled up the criminal justice program requirements, explaining they had a concentration in wrongful conviction prevention and police accountability. I filled out the paperwork that afternoon and felt something click into place, like I finally understood what I was supposed to do with my life. The experience showed me how easily innocent people get destroyed by corrupt systems, and I wanted to help build better safeguards so what happened to me wouldn't happen to others. My girlfriend supported the decision completely and said she always knew I'd find purpose in what we survived together. 3 months later, my girlfriend walked across the stage at graduation, wearing honors cords and holding her diploma. Her parents and Sarah sat in the audience clapping, and I took photos from my seat, feeling proud of everything she accomplished while dealing with her sister's trauma. She got the acceptance letter from the social work master's program 2 weeks after graduation, and we celebrated at dinner while she talked about specializing in trauma and family services. She told me that everything with Sarah showed her the kind of work she wanted to do, helping families navigate crisis and recovery when their worlds fall apart. The program started in the fall, and she was already reading the textbooks, making notes about approaches she wanted to learn. Sarah finished her sophomore year with decent grades, despite missing so much school time for therapy and court appearances. Her teachers sent home progress reports saying she showed remarkable determination and never gave up even when the work piled up. She was still seeing the therapist twice a week, but the sessions focused more on coping strategies now instead of just processing what happened. The therapist told my girlfriend that Sarah was developing healthy ways to manage triggers and difficult emotions, which meant the intensive crisis phase was ending. Sarah talked about junior year and which classes she wanted to take, making plans like a normal teenager thinking about her future. The father started seeing someone he met at the support group for parents of abuse survivors. My girlfriend told me about it over coffee, saying the woman's daughter survived abuse by a coach, and they bonded over the shared experience of guilt and recovery. My girlfriend seemed cautiously supportive and admitted it was good to see her dad building connections instead of staying stuck in isolation. He brought the woman to dinner one night, and she was kind and understood why Sarah sometimes got quiet or needed to leave the room. The father looked lighter somehow, like he was finally letting himself move forward after months of drowning in guilt. We got news about Henry through the prosecutor who kept us updated on the case. She called to tell us that other inmates learned why Henry was in prison and attacked him in the yard. He got moved to protective custody for his own safety, isolated from the general population. The prosecutor explained this was common for child predators in prison because even criminals have contempt for people who hurt kids. She said she didn't condone violence but understood why it happened, and Henry would spend the rest of his sentence in isolation. My girlfriend said it was hard to feel sympathy for him after everything he did to Sarah and the other girls. The campus safety office invited me to speak at an event about due process and evidence examination before rushing to judgment. I almost said no because talking publicly about the false accusations made my stomach hurt, but my girlfriend encouraged me to share what I learned. I stood at the podium in front of about 50 students and explained how close I came to being expelled and registered based on fabricated evidence. I talked about how the forensic analyst's work proved the screenshots were fake and how important it is to examine evidence carefully before destroying someone's life. Several students came up afterward to thank me and said my story made them think differently about accusations and investigations. One guy told me his roommate got accused of something last year, and everyone assumed he was guilty before hearing the full story. Walking back to my apartment, I felt drained, but glad I spoke up, because maybe it would help someone else avoid what I went through. Sarah attended her first school dance since everything happened, and my girlfriend showed me photos on her phone. Sarah was smiling with friends, wearing a blue dress and looking like a normal teenager having fun. My girlfriend was crying happy tears looking at the pictures, and I understood why, because it was the first time Sarah looked truly happy in months. The therapist told my girlfriend later that these moments of normalcy were crucial for recovery. They reminded survivors that trauma doesn't have to define their entire identity, and they can still have regular teenage experiences. Sarah came home from the dance talking about the music and the decorations, and for one night, she was just a high school girl who went to a dance. The FBI task force released their final report about the corruption ring, and Garrison sent us a copy. The document showed the officers had been operating for at least 6 years and victimized at least 19 children across multiple jurisdictions. Garrison called to walk us through the findings and said without Sarah's diary and the family's determination to find her, the officers might have continued for years more. The report detailed how they used youth programs to access vulnerable kids and how the institutional failures allowed it to happen. Reading through the pages made me feel sick, but also grateful that we helped stop them. The report recommended major reforms to prevent similar abuse in other departments. My girlfriend and I celebrated our 2-year anniversary at the restaurant where we had our first date. We talked about our future together after we both finished graduate school, making plans about where we wanted to live and what kind of work we wanted to do. She reached across the table and took my hand, saying we'd been through the worst possible crisis and came out stronger. I agreed and told her I knew we could handle whatever challenges came next because we already survived the unthinkable. The waiter brought dessert, and we talked about maybe getting married after graduate school, both of us smiling at the idea of building a life together. 2 years ago, I was a terrified college student facing false accusations, and now I was planning a future with the woman I loved. Sarah wrote a letter to BC thanking her for coming forward and helping her understand she wasn't alone in what happened. BC called my girlfriend crying happy tears after she got the letter and said she was going to frame it. At the next support group meeting, BC shared the letter with the other survivors and told them that moments like this reminded her why speaking up mattered, even though it was terrifying to relive her own trauma. Sarah's words helped BC feel like her pain had purpose, like she helped another girl find her way through the darkness. My girlfriend told me about it later, and we both felt grateful that something positive came from all the suffering, that the survivors were supporting each other and healing together. A few months after the support group letter exchange, the father made a big decision about his career. He sold his business to a competitor and took a job at a smaller company with regular hours and no weekend work. My girlfriend told me he wanted to be home for dinner every night while Sarah finished high school, and when I saw him next, he looked less stressed than I'd seen him in months. He pulled me aside and said he'd spent years chasing success and missed too much of his daughter's lives, and he wasn't going to make that mistake again. He said career achievements didn't matter if you weren't there for your family when they needed you most, and Sarah needed him present now more than ever. I could see he meant it because he started coaching Sarah's soccer team and showed up to every therapy appointment she wanted him at. My girlfriend said it was like having a different father, one who actually prioritized being a dad over being successful. On graduation day, 2 years after that terrible night in my dorm, I walked across the stage to get my degree while my parents cheered from the audience. My girlfriend and her whole family came too, sitting together in the third row and clapping when they called my name. After the ceremony, we took photos outside the auditorium, and I showed everyone my acceptance letter to a graduate program focused on criminal justice reform and preventing wrongful convictions. The program specialized in fixing broken systems that let innocent people get destroyed while guilty ones went free, and I knew it was exactly what I wanted to do with my life. The father shook my hand hard and looked me in the eyes and told me he was proud of the man I'd become through everything we'd been through. My girlfriend squeezed my other hand, and I felt grateful for all of them, for surviving something that could have destroyed us, but somehow made us stronger instead. 2 years after that scary night when cops showed up at my dorm, life settled into something different, but still good. Sarah was doing well in therapy and school, making plans for college and talking about studying psychology to help other kids like her. My girlfriend and I were building our future together after both getting into grad programs in the same city, and we talked about maybe getting married after we finished our degrees. The father had learned to forgive himself for almost destroying an innocent person's life, and he showed up for his family in ways he never did before. The corrupt officers were all in prison where they belonged, serving long sentences for what they did to vulnerable kids. We all carried scars from what happened and probably always would, but we were moving forward with purpose and the knowledge that speaking up and fighting back against corruption was worth every scary moment. The system failed to protect kids who needed protection, but we helped show that failure and create changes that would protect others going forward and that mattered more than any perfect ending ever could.